The whispers rippled through the reception hall like wind through summer wheat. I stood frozen, champagne flute pressed to my lips, watching my new mother-in-law glide across the marble floor in a floor-length white gown that rivaled my own. Eleanor Whitfield made her entrance 40 minutes late to our reception, timing it perfectly with our first toast as husband and wife. "Doesn't she look absolutely stunning?" my sister Vivian hissed in my ear, her voice dripping with the special kind of venom reserved for wedding day saboteurs. Like a 60-year-old bride who got lost on her way to her own ceremony. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I lowered my glass slowly, my face maintaining the serene smile I'd perfected over years of corporate negotiations. She certainly knows how to make an entrance. Across the room, my new husband Thomas caught sight of his mother. His expression shifted from joy to confusion to that familiar, apologetic grimace I'd grown accustomed to over our 3 years together. He excused himself from his groomsmen and made his way toward Eleanor, who was now accepting congratulations, as though they were meant for her. "Breathe, Caroline," Vivian reminded me, squeezing my hand. "Remember what Dad always said. Never let them see you sweat," I finished automatically, the mantra our father had drilled into us since childhood. David Chen, self-made real estate magnate and master of the poker face, had taught his daughters well. I'm fine. I wasn't fine. This was the culmination of 2 years of subtle boundary violations, backhanded compliments, and accidental wedding. Planning sabotage. The white dress was merely Eleanor's grand finale. Thomas reached his mother, bending to kiss her cheek while whispering something in her ear. I recognized his peacekeeping posture, shoulders slightly hunched, placating smile, the gentle hand on her elbow. Eleanor's response was a theatrical laugh that carried across the room, followed by a dismissive pat on his cheek. "Should I spill?" "Red wine on her," Vivian offered, already scanning the room for a server. "It would look like an accident." I shook my head, watching as Thomas's father Richard joined them, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo in the situation. "No. Let her have her moment. This is exactly what she wants, to provoke me into making a scene at my own wedding. What Eleanor didn't know, what almost no one knew except my sister and our family attorney, was that the elegant country estate hosting our wedding wasn't just our venue. It was my home. One of my homes, to be precise. The first major property I'd purchased independently after my company's IPO 3 years ago, hidden behind layers of LLCs and trusts that obscured my ownership from public record and, most importantly, from my new in-laws. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thomas knew I was successful, of course. As the founder of Chentech Solutions, a cybersecurity firm that had grown exponentially in the last 5 years, I had a comfortable lifestyle. But he didn't know the extent of it. I'd learned early in my career that revealing too much too soon changed how people treated me. So I'd maintained the image of a moderately successful entrepreneur while quietly amassing a portfolio that would have made even Eleanor's old money. "Sensibilities take notice. Here he comes," Vivian murmured, "and he's bringing her with him." Thomas approached with Eleanor on his arm, his expression silently pleading for peace on our wedding day. Richard trailed behind them like a reluctant shadow. "Caroline, darling," Eleanor cooed, air-kissing somewhere near my cheek. The scent of her exclusive French perfume, the same one she'd once mentioned, was probably outside your budget, dear, enveloped me like a cloud. What a lovely little ceremony. So quaint. And this venue. Richard and I were just saying it reminds us of our summer home in the Hamptons. Doesn't it, Richard? Richard, to his credit, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "It's a beautiful place," he offered neutrally. "Mom chose an interesting dress," Thomas attempted, his voice straining for lightness. "Oh, this old thing?" Eleanor smoothed her hands over the obviously new, obviously bridal gown. I had such a terrible accident with my original dress this morning. Complete disaster. This was the only suitable replacement in my closet. I couldn't possibly miss my only son's wedding day, could I? Of course not, I replied evenly. And white looks lovely on you. Thomas exhaled slightly, relieved at my diplomacy. Eleanor's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. You're too kind. Though I must say I was surprised by some of your choices today. The flowers seem a bit economical, and I noticed the champagne isn't the label we discussed. By discussed, she meant the list of demands she'd sent our wedding planner after we'd finalized everything. Changes that would have doubled our already generous budget. Everything is exactly as we wanted it, I said, linking my arm through Thomas's. Wouldn't you agree, husband? His smile reached his eyes for the first time since his mother's arrival. Absolutely, wife. Eleanor's expression soured briefly before she recovered. Well, speaking of choices, Thomas, your father and I have the most exciting news to share with you both. Richard's face went through a complex series of emotions. None of them exciting. Mom, maybe now isn't, Thomas began. Nonsense. When better to share good news than at a celebration? Eleanor swept her arm wide, nearly knocking over a passing server's tray of hors d'oeuvres. Richard and I have decided to sell the house in Connecticut. Thomas blinked in surprise. You're selling the family home? But you've always said, we're downsizing, darling. At our age, it's the sensible thing. All those stairs, all that maintenance. She waved dismissively. Besides, we want to be closer to you now that you're starting this new chapter. A knot formed in my stomach. Closer? Thomas echoed. Eleanor beamed. Yes. We've already spoken with a realtor about properties in your neighborhood. We thought perhaps within a few blocks of your charming little rental. That way I can be available to help when the babies arrive. A young couple needs guidance, after all. Vivian made a choking sound beside me, quickly disguised as a cough. That's really not necessary, Mom, Thomas said carefully. Caroline and I aren't planning on starting a family immediately, and we're actually thinking about moving ourselves. This was news to me. We'd discussed looking for a larger place eventually, but nothing concrete. Eleanor's smile didn't waver. Well, that's even better. We can help you find somewhere suitable, somewhere with a proper guest suite for when we visit. Or perhaps a separate entrance. Richard and I were just discussing how practical it would be if we all shared a property. Multi-generational living is very on trend, you know. On trend, I repeated faintly. Eleanor. Richard finally spoke up, placing a restraining hand on his wife's arm. We agreed to discuss this after they returned from their honeymoon. She shrugged off his touch. Oh, Richard, don't be such a wet blanket. Why wait to share good news? She turned back to us. We've already listed our house. The market is excellent. Right now. Our agent expects it will sell within the month, so we'll need to move rather quickly. The implication hung in the air like a guillotine. You're planning to move in with us? Thomas asked, his voice rising slightly. Just temporarily? Of course, Eleanor assured him, though her definition of temporary was notoriously elastic. Just until we find the perfect place nearby. A few months at most. You have that spare bedroom, don't you? The one you use as a home office? Richard can help Thomas with the heavy lifting, and I can whip that little kitchen of yours into shape. Caroline, I've noticed it's a bit underutilized, because both Thomas and I worked long hours and often ordered in. A fact Eleanor had commented on repeatedly during her infrequent visits. That's not going to work, I said, keeping my voice even despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. Our place is too small, and we value our privacy as newlyweds. Eleanor's eyes widened in feigned hurt. Privacy from family? Surely you don't mean, Mom, Thomas cut in firmly, surprising me with his directness. Caroline's right. Our apartment isn't suitable for 4 adults. but we'll help you find a short-term rental while you look for a new home." Eleanor's lips thinned. "A rental? At our age? I don't think you understand, Thomas. The Connecticut house is already under contract. The buyers needed a quick closing. For tax purposes, and they made such a generous offer." "You accepted an offer without having a place to go?" Thomas asked incredulously. "We assumed family would help family," Eleanor replied, her voice taking on the martyr tone I'd come to dread. "Especially since we've given you so much. Your education, your first car, the down payment for your starter apartment. The down payment that came with strings attached, including Eleanor having a key for emergencies, until Thomas had finally changed the locks after she'd let herself in one too many times while we were out. Of course we'll help," I interjected, before Thomas could get pulled deeper into her guilt vortex. "We'll find you a lovely rental near us. In fact, I have a real estate contact who specializes in luxury short-term accommodations." Eleanor looked as though she'd bitten into something sour. "That's very generous, but we couldn't possibly impose on your connections. Besides, we've already begun packing. We'll be ready to move in by the time you return from your honeymoon." So, that was her game. Create a crisis, present it as a fait accompli, and force our hand while we were thousands of miles away on a beach in Bali. Thomas ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, a sure sign of his mounting stress. "Mom, this is our wedding day. Can we please discuss this later?" "Of course, darling," Eleanor conceded with rehearsed graciousness. "I just thought you'd be pleased we'll be closer. A mother worries, you know, especially when her son marries someone so career-focused." Vivian made another choking sound. I maintained my smile even as I calculated exactly how quickly I could evict Eleanor from a property once the lease was in my name. "We're always happy to have family nearby," I lied smoothly. "Just not under the same roof." Eleanor opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by our wedding planner announcing it was time for the cake cutting. Thomas seized the opportunity to guide me away, whispering rushed apologies in my ear. "I had no idea she was planning this," he insisted as we crossed the reception hall. "I swear, Caroline." "I know," I assured him. Because I did. Thomas was many things, but he wasn't a conspirator. Just a man who had never quite learned to stand firmly against his mother's machinations. As we approached our wedding cake, a 5-tier masterpiece that Eleanor had called ostentatious when I selected it, I caught Vivian's eye across the room. She raised her champagne glass slightly in a silent question. "Do we have a problem?" I gave a nearly imperceptible shake of my head. No, we didn't have a problem. Eleanor had a problem. She just didn't know it yet. The truth was, Thomas and I wouldn't be returning to our charming little rental after our honeymoon. 2 weeks ago, I'd given notice to our landlord. While we were in Bali, the moving company would be transferring our belongings to my country estate, the very one hosting our wedding reception. The home that Eleanor had just compared to her summer place without realizing she was standing in my living room. The home with the guest house nearly half a mile down the private drive, where Eleanor and Richard would be welcome to stay, temporarily, under my rules, in my house. I took the knife Thomas offered me, placing my hand over his as we prepared to cut the cake together. Over his shoulder, I could see Eleanor watching us, already moving forward as if to position herself in the photographs. "Ready?" Thomas asked, his eyes bright with love and relief that the awkward moment with his mother had passed. "More than ready," I replied, thinking not of the cake, but of the moment 2 weeks from now when Eleanor would discover exactly whose house she'd be living in. My phone buzzed in the hidden pocket of my wedding dress, a text from my head of security. Mrs. Whitfield attempted to enter the east wing, redirected as instructed. I smiled as I pressed the knife into the bottom tier of our cake. Eleanor had already begun her inspection of what she assumed was a rented venue, likely looking for flaws to point out later. Instead, she'd encountered the security measures I'd installed throughout my home. "What's that smile for?" Thomas asked as cameras flashed around us. "Just happy," I replied, leaning forward to feed him the first bite of cake. Incredibly, perfectly happy. And I was. Despite Eleanor's white dress and her presumptuous moving plans, nothing could diminish the joy of marrying the man I loved, even if that man came with a mother-in-law who was about to learn a very valuable lesson about assumptions. As we turned to face our cheering guests, champagne flutes raised again for another toast, I caught Eleanor straightening her white dress, preparing to insert herself into yet another key moment. Let her have tonight, I thought calmly. In 2 weeks, the real show would begin. The reception continued in a blur of dancing, champagne, and congratulations. Through it all, Eleanor hovered at the edges of every important moment, making sure she was visible in as many photographs as possible. When Thomas and I shared our first dance, she managed to spill a glass of water, thankfully not red wine, just as the song ended, creating a momentary commotion that pulled attention her way. "I've counted 6 separate people asking me if that's your new stepmother," Vivian muttered as we stood by the dessert table later. "And Dad's date is getting annoyed." Our father's girlfriend, Lynette, a kind-hearted art gallery owner, 15. Years his junior, had been nothing but gracious throughout the wedding planning. Unlike Eleanor, she had worn an appropriate navy blue dress and had gone out of her way to blend into the background. "Dad seems to be keeping her occupied," I observed, watching as my father twirled Lynette around the dance floor, both of them laughing. Eleanor tried to seat herself at Dad's table during dinner. Vivian informed me. I had to personally escort her to her assigned seat. She told me the place cards must have been mixed up. I sighed. Of course she did. "So what's the plan for the moving situation?" Vivian asked, keeping her voice low. "Because you know she's serious. That woman will show up on your doorstep with a moving truck and tears if she has to." "She can try," I replied, watching as Thomas chatted with college friends across the room. "But we won't be at the apartment. The movers come the day after tomorrow." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "You're finally telling him about this place?" I nodded. "Tonight, after everyone leaves. I've arranged for us to stay here before we leave for Bali. I'll give him the full tour in the morning. And you think he'll be okay with the fact that you own the venue where you just got married? That you've owned it for years and never told him?" I'd been asking myself the same question for weeks. Thomas and I had built our relationship on honesty and communication, except for this one significant omission on my part. "I think he'll understand. Once I explain," I said, hoping it was true. "I needed to be sure he wasn't marrying me for my money. You know how it was after Chentech went public?" Vivian nodded sympathetically. The sudden influx of wealth had brought a parade of interested suitors, most of whom had disappeared just as quickly when I made it clear I wouldn't be financing their dreams or lifestyles. "Thomas isn't like that," Vivian acknowledged. "But he might be hurt you didn't trust him with the truth." It wasn't about trust, not exactly. I searched for the right words. It was about wanting one part of my life that wasn't defined by my success, where I could just be Caroline, not Caroline Chen, tech entrepreneur. "And now you'll be Caroline Whitfield, secret real estate tycoon," Vivian teased. Speaking of Whitfields, incoming at 2 o'clock. Eleanor was making her way toward us, champagne glass in hand, white dress luminescent under the reception lights. "Caroline, darling," she called, her voice carrying. "I've just been speaking with the venue manager about extending our time. These rental places are always so strict with their hours, but I told him that as the mother of the groom, I have certain prerogatives." I stiffened. There was no venue manager. There was my house manager, Phillips, who had explicit instructions about tonight's event. "That won't be necessary, Eleanor," I said, forcing a smile. "We've arranged everything exactly as we want it." "Nonsense. The party is just getting started. Besides, I've barely had any time with my son today." She craned her neck, looking for Thomas. "Where is he?" "We should discuss the moving arrangements before you leave for your honeymoon. I'll need a key to your apartment, of course, to supervise the cleaners before we arrive." "There is no key to give," I said firmly. "We won't be returning to that apartment." Eleanor's eyes widened with calculated surprise. "No? Where will you be living then? Thomas hasn't mentioned any change of plans." Because Thomas didn't know yet. I'd wanted to wait until after the wedding, to surprise him with the home I hoped we'd build a life in together. "That's between Thomas and me," I replied evenly. "But I can assure you, there won't be room for long-term house guests." Eleanor's expression hardened momentarily before melting into concerned confusion. "Now, Caroline, I understand the stress of a wedding day might make one say thoughtless things, but family must come first. Thomas knows that. He always has." "Couldn't agree more," came my father's voice as he joined our circle, Lynette beside him. "Family is everything. Wouldn't you agree, Eleanor?" Eleanor's smile tightened at my father's arrival. They had met only a handful of times, and each encounter had been a masterclass in polite warfare. Eleanor, with her old money pedigree and thinly veiled disdain for self-made success. My father, with his immigrant background and hard-earned empire, saw through her immediately. "David," she acknowledged coolly. "Lovely ceremony. So unique to blend Caroline's cultural traditions with a Western service." My cultural traditions consisted of a single tea ceremony that morning, a nod to my father's Chinese heritage that Thomas and I had both wanted to honor. Eleanor had arrived late for that as well. "The tea ceremony is thousands of years old," my father replied pleasantly. "A bit more established than some traditions, I'd say." Eleanor's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes. Well, traditions are important to preserve. Speaking of which, Thomas and I were just discussing how Richard and I will be staying with the newlyweds for a short while after they return from Bali, just until we find a suitable new home nearby." My father raised an eyebrow, glancing at me. "Is that so? How interesting." Caroline hadn't mentioned that arrangement. "It's not an arrangement," I clarified. "It's a misunderstanding that we'll sort out later. Tonight is for celebrating." "Absolutely," Lynette chimed in warmly. "And what a beautiful celebration it is. Caroline and Thomas have created such a magical evening." Eleanor gave Lynette a dismissive once-over before turning back to me. "Well, we can discuss details later. Though I must say, I'm surprised Thomas hasn't included me in these mysterious new living arrangements. We've always been so close." The string quartet began playing the song that signaled the final hour of our reception. Thomas appeared at my side as if summoned, his arm sliding naturally around my waist. "What have I missed?" he asked, looking between our tense expressions. "Your mother was just leaving to touch up her makeup," Vivian supplied helpfully. "Weren't you, Eleanor?" Eleanor's mouth opened in surprise at the dismissal, but before she could respond, my father smoothly took her elbow. "Actually, Eleanor, I've been meaning to ask you about that charity gala you chair. Perhaps you could tell me about it on our way to the bar. Lynette and I are considering some new philanthropic ventures." It was a masterful extraction. Eleanor, unable to resist the opportunity to impress my wealthy father, allowed herself to be guided away, already launching into a detailed explanation of her social committee work. "I love your dad." Thomas sighed gratefully once they were out of earshot. "He has his moments," I agreed, leaning into his embrace. "Are you enjoying our wedding, Mr. Whitfield?" "More than I can express, Mrs. Whitfield," he replied, kissing my temple. "Though I'm sorry about my mother's dress, and the moving ambush, and whatever else she's done that I haven't noticed yet." I laughed despite myself. "It's fine, nothing can ruin today." "That's what I love about you," he murmured. "Your unshakable calm. If only he knew the storm brewing beneath that calm." the revelations waiting for him tomorrow morning, the conversation we would need to have about why his wife of less than 24 hours owned a multi-million-dollar estate without his knowledge. For now, though, I pushed those thoughts aside. We had one more hour of celebrating with our loved ones, one more hour of being the center of attention before we could finally be alone. "Dance with me?" I suggested, leading him toward the floor where other couples were already swaying to the music. As Thomas took me in his arms, I caught sight of Eleanor watching us from the bar, her white dress stark against the evening shadows. My father said something that recaptured her attention, but not before I saw the calculation in her eyes. Let her scheme, I thought as Thomas twirled me across the floor. In 2 weeks, she would learn what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object, or more specifically, what happened when Eleanor Whitfield tried to move into Caroline Chen's house without an invitation. The endgame had already begun. Eleanor just didn't know she was playing. The last guest departed shortly after midnight, leaving behind empty champagne flutes and fading music. Thomas loosened his bow tie with a contented sigh as we stood on the grand staircase, waving goodbye to my college roommate and her husband. "We did it," he said, wrapping an arm around my waist. "We actually survived a wedding with both our families in attendance and no major casualties." "Your mother wearing white doesn't count as a casualty?" I teased, kicking off my heels now that we were finally alone. Thomas winced. "I'm still so sorry about that. And the moving bombshell. I swear I had no idea she was planning either." "No," I assured him, leaning into his embrace. "It's not your fault." "Still, I should have—" I silenced him with a kiss. "It's our wedding night. The last thing I want to discuss is your mother's wardrobe choices or her housing plans." Relief washed over his features. "You're right. This is about us now." He glanced around the grand foyer of the estate, taking in the soaring ceilings and elegant furnishings. "Though I hate to think about going back to our cramped apartment after staying in this palace tonight. The wedding planner said we have the honeymoon suite until morning, right?" This was it. The moment I'd been rehearsing in my mind for weeks. "About that," I began, taking his hands in mine. "I have something to show you." Thomas raised his eyebrows. "A surprise? Now?" "Now," I confirmed, slipping my feet back into my shoes. "Follow me." Curious, Thomas allowed me to lead him through the reception hall, now being quietly reset by the staff, and into a corridor he hadn't seen during our wedding preparations. Unlike the public areas of the estate, this hallway was lined with personal photographs and art pieces I'd collected over the years. I watched Thomas's expression shift from confusion to puzzlement as we approached a heavy oak door at the end of the passage. "Caroline, what is this? I thought this area was off-limits to wedding parties." Instead of answering, I pressed my palm against a nearly invisible scanner beside the doorframe. The lock clicked open. "That's not standard for a venue rental," Thomas observed, his brow furrowing. I pushed open the door, revealing my private study. A warm, book-lined room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the moonlit gardens. A massive desk of polished walnut dominated one wall, while comfortable leather chairs surrounded a low table near the stone fireplace. Thomas stepped inside, turning slowly as he took in the details. The framed patents on the wall, the family, photographs, the half-finished mug of tea I'd left that morning before getting ready for our ceremony. "Caroline?" His voice held a question he couldn't quite formulate. I closed the door behind us. "Welcome home, Thomas." "Home?" he echoed, his eyes widening as understanding began to dawn. "What are you saying?" I took a deep breath. "I'm saying that this estate isn't just our wedding venue, it's my home. Our home now if you want it to be." Thomas sank into one of the leather chairs, stunned. "You own this place? The entire estate?" I nodded, perching on the armrest beside him. "I bought it 3 years ago, just after Chentech's IPO. It was the first major property I purchased on my own." 3 years, he repeated, making the calculation in his head. We were already dating then. Yes, I acknowledged, watching him carefully. We'd been together about 6 months when I closed on it. And you never thought to mention that you owned a... He gestured around us. A mansion? An estate with its own security staff and grounds large enough to host 200 wedding guests? There was hurt in his voice, but also confusion. This was the tricky part, helping him understand without making him feel deceived or, worse, inadequate. It wasn't about hiding it from you specifically, I explained. After Chentech went public, everything changed. Suddenly, everyone wanted something from me. Investors, distant relatives, friends I hadn't heard from since high school. Dating became complicated. So you tested me? The hurt was more pronounced now. You lived in a 1-bedroom apartment and drove a 5-year-old Audi while secretly being what? A millionaire? Multi-millionaire, technically, I said, then winced at how it sounded. That's not the point. I didn't test you, Thomas. I protected myself. There's a difference. He stood up, pacing the length of the study. I proposed to you in that apartment. I worried about whether I could afford the ring you deserved. I've been stressing for months about how we'd ever save enough for a house in this market. Meanwhile, you already had... this. He stopped at the window, staring out at the immaculate grounds. Did you laugh about it? Poor Thomas, thinking he needs to provide when his girlfriend could buy and sell him 10 times over? Never, I said firmly, joining him at the window. Not once, Thomas. That's not who I am, and it's not who we are. He turned to me, his expression torn between bewilderment and betrayal. Then why keep it from me for 3 years? Why agree to live in that tiny apartment? Why let me believe we were in the same financial situation? I chose my next words carefully. When we met, I'd just ended a relationship with someone who saw me as a meal ticket, not a partner. Before that, there was a man who proposed after 3 months, right after Chentech's valuation hit the news. It changes people, Thomas. Money changes how they see you. I'm not people, Caroline. I'm the man you just married. And that's why I'm showing you now, I said softly. Because you're my husband, and I want to start our marriage with complete honesty. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, dislodging what remained of its wedding day styling. Complete honesty would have been telling me before I put a ring on your finger. He had a point, and it stung more than I wanted to admit. You're right. I should have told you sooner. I needed to be sure. Sure of what? That I wasn't a gold digger? The words hung between us, sharp and accusatory. Sure that what we had was real, I corrected gently. That it was based on us, not my bank account or your mother's approval or anything else external. At the mention of his mother, Thomas's expression shifted. Oh God, my mother. She has no idea, does she? That speech she gave comparing this place to their summer home. He suddenly looked horrified. She announced they're moving in with us. Here. Despite the tension of the moment, I couldn't help but smile. Not exactly. They're welcome to stay in the guest house while they look for a new place. It's about half a mile down the drive. Thomas stared at me for a long moment before a reluctant laugh escaped him. She's going to have an aneurysm when she finds out. Probably, I agreed, relieved to see even the smallest break in his anger. Though technically she invited herself to move in without asking either of us first. That's Eleanor Whitfield for you, he sighed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. She's been like this my whole life, deciding what's best for everyone around her, then acting shocked when we don't fall in line with her plans. I ventured to take his hand, relieved when he didn't pull away. I really was going to tell you after the proposal. But then your mother insisted on being involved in every aspect of the wedding planning, and it seemed complicated. Because you knew she'd try to take over completely if she realized whose house she was redecorating. Thomas surmised, understanding dawning in his eyes. Something like that, I admitted. But mostly because I wanted our wedding to be about us, not my money or her opinions on how I should spend it. Thomas was silent for a long moment, his thumb absently tracing circles on the back of my hand as he processed everything. Finally, he asked, "What else don't I know? Are there other properties, companies, a private island somewhere?" I laughed, softly. No islands. But yes, there are other investments. Chentech was just the beginning. I've diversified considerably over the past few years. He shook his head in disbelief. My wife, the secret tycoon. He wasn't angry anymore. But there was still something guarded in his expression. I feel like I should be wondering who I actually married today. That hurt more than his anger had. I'm still me, Thomas. Still the woman who burns toast and works too late and falls asleep during movies. My bank account doesn't change who I am. No, he agreed after a moment. It doesn't. But secrets change relationships, Caroline. I know, I said quietly, and I'm sorry for keeping this from you. Truly. But I'm not sorry for being careful with my heart and my life's work. Thomas studied my face, searching for something. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because his expression softened. So, this is really our home now? Not just for tonight? I nodded. If you want it to be. The movers are coming for our things from the apartment the day after tomorrow. While we're in Bali, everything will be set up here. I hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Unless you'd prefer to find a different place together, somewhere that's ours from the beginning. Not just mine, that becomes ours. Thomas looked around the study again, his gaze lingering on the photographs, many of which included him, that I'd placed among my books and mementos. You've already made it ours, he observed. These past few weeks, getting the place ready for the wedding. You were really getting it ready for us, weren't you? Yes, I admitted. Your favorite coffee is already in the kitchen. Your books are on their way. I've set up a home office for you in the East Wing with a view of the lake. He laughed then, a genuine sound that eased some of the tightness in my chest. You don't do anything halfway, do you? Not when it matters, I replied, squeezing his hand. And you matter, Thomas. More than anything. He pulled me into his arms, resting his chin on top of my head. I'm still processing all this, and we have a lot more to talk about. But right now, it's our wedding night. And I'd very much like my wife to show me to our bedroom in our apparently enormous house. Relief coursed through me. We weren't completely past this hurdle, but we would be. I think that can be arranged, Mr. Whitfield. Lead the way, Mrs. Whitfield, he said, then paused. Or is it still Ms. Chen professionally? I just realized I don't even know if you've changed your name on your multiple property deeds and company registrations. Professionally, I'm still Chen, I confirmed, leading him toward the door. But everywhere else, I'm proudly Caroline Whitfield. Even on the deed to this house, I hesitated. Not yet, but it can be added tomorrow, if that's what you're asking. Thomas shook his head. I'm not asking to be added to your assets, Caroline. I'm just trying to understand the scope of what I didn't know until tonight. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. Would you like a full accounting? We can go through everything if it would help you feel more secure about us. Not tonight, he decided, brushing a strand of hair from my face. Tonight, I just want to be with my wife. The financial disclosures can wait until after the honeymoon. As we made our way upstairs to the master suite, I couldn't help but think about Eleanor and her white dress, her presumptions and plans. She had no idea what awaited her return, that her son had married not just a career woman, but a woman whose success dwarfed the Whitfield family fortune she was so proud of. A woman whose house she had just invited herself to move into. Morning came with pale sunlight streaming through the windows of the master suite. Thomas was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed looking out over the estate grounds with a cup of coffee in hand. Good morning, husband, I said, stretching luxuriously against the Egyptian cotton sheets. He turned with a smile that seemed more settled than the night before. "Good morning, wife. I've been exploring while you slept." "And what's the verdict?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light despite the flutter of anxiety in my chest. "The verdict is that my mother is going to spontaneously combust when she realizes this place belongs to you." He handed me a coffee mug from the bedside table. "Phillips brought this up for you. Your house manager seems very efficient." "He is," I agreed, taking a grateful sip. "He's been with me since I bought the place." He gave me a brief tour of the ground floor. "Caroline, this house is incredible. Why did you ever agree to live in our apartment?" I set my coffee down carefully. "Because it was important to you to feel like you were contributing equally to our life together. You wanted us to find a place within your budget, and I respected that." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "So you let me think I was being the provider, while all along we could have lived comfortably regardless," I finished for him. "But there's more to building a life together than square footage, Thomas. I valued your pride and independence more than I wanted a bigger closet." He was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "I'm not sure if that makes me feel better or worse." "It wasn't about deceiving you," I insisted. "It was about meeting you where you were while I figured out how to tell you the truth without it changing things between us." "And now? Now that I know?" I met his gaze steadily. "Now we figure out what our life looks like together, with all the cards on the table." Thomas set his own mug down and came back to sit beside me on the bed. "I spent an hour this morning feeling like an idiot for not realizing sooner. The signs were there, the way you never worried about money, the business trips that coincided with improvements around the estate, according to Phillips." "I never meant to make you feel that way," I said, distressed. "I know," he assured me. "And after I got past the initial shock, I realized something important." "What's that?" "That my brilliant, successful wife trusted me enough to finally let me see all of her, even the parts she's been hurt for sharing before." He took my hand. "I'm still adjusting, Caroline. But I'm not angry anymore." Relief flooded through me. "I was worried I'd ruined everything." "It would take a lot more than a secret estate to ruin us," he said, kissing my knuckles. "Though maybe no more major surprises for a while?" "Deal," I agreed readily. "So, shall we continue your tour? We have a few hours before we need to leave for the airport." Thomas grinned. "Absolutely. I'm particularly interested in the guest house where my mother will be staying." "Planning ahead already?" I laughed. "Let's just say I want to be prepared for the inevitable storm," he replied. "Speaking of which, when were you planning to tell her that her new address is actually your property?" I slipped out of bed, reaching for my robe. "I thought we'd let her discover it naturally when she arrives with her moving van while we're in Bali." Thomas's eyebrows shot up. "That's diabolical. She'll have a complete meltdown without us there to witness it." "Oh, we'll witness it," I assured him, tying my robe. "Phillips has standing instructions to save all security footage." "You've thought of everything," Thomas marveled, a mix of admiration and lingering disbelief in his voice. "Not everything," I admitted. "I didn't anticipate her wearing white to our wedding or announcing her moving plans quite so publicly." Thomas grimaced. "I'm still mortified about the dress, though watching your sister's face when Mom walked in was almost worth it." "Vivian was ready to commit a felony with that red wine," I confirmed, smiling at the memory of my sister's protective outrage. "Should we call my parents before we leave?" Thomas asked, suddenly serious. "Give them some warning about the new arrangements?" I considered this. "If we tell them now, Eleanor will have 2 weeks to formulate her counterattack while we're out of the country. Better to let Phillips handle the initial shock and give her time to adjust to the reality before we return." "You're probably right," Thomas conceded, though I feel a bit sorry for Phillips. "Don't," I assured him. "He's dealt with Eleanor during wedding preparations. He's more than capable of managing her expectations about living arrangements. Thomas shook his head, but he was smiling. I'm beginning to think my mother has finally met her match in you, Caroline Whitfield. She has no idea, I agreed, extending my hand to help him up. Now, about that tour. We spent the morning exploring the estate together, Thomas marveling at features I'd long taken for granted. The wine cellar, the indoor pool, the fully equipped home theater. His delight was infectious, reminding me why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. Unlike the fortune hunters who had preceded him in my life, Thomas's amazement wasn't calculating or envious. It was pure appreciation, tinged with residual surprise, but without resentment. In the kitchen, we found Phillips, preparing a light breakfast despite the early hour. Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield, he greeted us formally, though I caught the pleased glint in his eye at using Thomas's surname for me. I trust you slept well? Very well, thank you, Phillips, I replied, accepting the plate of sliced fruit he offered. Thomas and I have been discussing the arrangements for his parents during our absence. Phillips's expression remained neutral, but I knew him well enough to see the slight tightening around his eyes. Yes, madam. I've prepared the guest house, as instructed. Though perhaps you'd like to review the security protocols given the unexpected nature of their stay. Thomas looked between us, puzzled. Security protocols? Standard procedure for guests, I explained smoothly. Access codes? Restricted areas, that sort of thing. I wasn't aware we had restricted areas, Thomas said, helping himself to a croissant from the basket Phillips presented. The East Wing houses Mrs. Whitfield's, home office and secure server room, Phillips explained. Those areas require biometric authentication. Then there are the art storage rooms, the vault, and of course the security monitoring station. Thomas nearly choked on his croissant. We have a vault? A small one, I said, shooting Phillips a look that clearly conveyed he was enjoying this far too much. For important documents, family heirlooms, that sort of thing. Of course, Thomas murmured faintly. Just the usual small home vault, naturally. Phillips cleared his throat. Regarding Mrs. Whitfield Sr.'s expected arrival? Eleanor, I corrected automatically. Let's not confuse things with two Mrs. Whitfields. Very good, madam. Regarding Eleanor's expected arrival, shall I arrange for a full security briefing, or would you prefer a more limited access approach? Thomas and I exchanged glances. Limited, we said in unison. Very good, Phillips nodded, making a subtle note on his tablet. And the duration of their stay? Indefinite, according to my mother, Thomas replied. But let's plan for 1 month maximum. If they haven't found their own place by then, we'll need to reevaluate. I understand completely, sir, Phillips said, his tone suggesting he understood far more than just the words. Now, about your departure for Bali. The car will be ready at 11 to take you to the airport. Your luggage has been packed according to Mrs. Whitfield's instructions, and all travel documents are prepared in your portfolio. Thomas blinked. You packed for us? Phillips has a staff, I explained. They're very discreet. Right, Thomas said, looking slightly overwhelmed again. Of course they are. If there's nothing else, I'll make the final arrangements for your departure, Phillips said, already moving efficiently toward the door. Actually, Thomas called after him. I do. Have one question, Phillips paused. Sir? How exactly does one manage a mother-in-law who shows up expecting to move in, only to discover she's actually a guest in her daughter-in-law's mansion? For the first time that morning, Phillips allowed himself a small smile. With impeccable courtesy and very firm boundaries, sir, both of which I assure you are my specialties. After he'd gone, Thomas turned to me with newfound respect in his eyes. I think I'm going to like Phillips. He grows on you, I agreed, finishing my fruit. He's been invaluable these past 3 years. And completely in on your secret, Thomas observed. Unlike your husband. I winced. That's going to take a while to live down, isn't it? A little while, he confirmed, but his tone was teasing rather than bitter. Though I might forgive you faster if you show me this vault of yours before we leave. I laughed, relieved that the worst of the revelation was behind us. Deal. And then we'll need to get ready for Bali. 2 uninterrupted weeks of just us, no mothers in white dresses, no property disclosures, no surprises. Sounds perfect, Thomas agreed, pulling me in for a kiss that tasted of buttery croissant and new beginnings. Though I'm not sure anything could surprise me more than the past 24 hours have. If only he knew what awaited us upon our return. An Eleanor who had discovered her new position in the family hierarchy in the most dramatic way possible. But that was a storm for another day. For now, we had a honeymoon to begin, and a marriage to celebrate, secrets and all. As we left, the kitchen hand in hand, I couldn't help but think that for all her manipulations and machinations, Eleanor had unknowingly done us a favor. Her announcement had forced my hand, bringing the truth about my wealth into the open sooner rather than later. And Thomas, despite his initial hurt, was adapting with the grace and humor that had made me fall in love with him. Perhaps I owed my new mother-in-law a thank you, or perhaps I'd just enjoy the security footage of her face when she realized exactly whose house she had invited herself to move into. The Bali sun had bronzed our skin to a warm glow as our private car wound its way up the long, tree-lined drive to the estate. 2 weeks of honeymoon bliss, white sand beaches, private villas, and not a single mention of mothers-in-law or property deeds, had left us refreshed and reconnected. Thomas held my hand as we approached the house, both of us noticing the silver. Mercedes parked near the guest house. They're here, he said unnecessarily, a hint of tension creeping into his voice. How long do you think they've been settled in? I checked my phone, scrolling through the daily updates Phillips had dutifully sent. 12 days. They arrived the day after we left. And? Don't keep me in suspense. I grinned. Phillips has been remarkably restrained in his reports, just factual. Updates about their arrival, requested accommodations, and daily schedules. That tells us nothing about the dramatics, Thomas complained. Did my mother faint? Threaten legal action? Start planning renovations? I instructed Phillips to save the details for our return, I admitted. I wanted us to enjoy our honeymoon without Eleanor updates interrupting our massages. Thomas groaned. Smart, but torturous. I've been dying to know how she reacted. Our car rounded the final curve, the main house came into view, and with it a striking new addition to the front landscaping. Where once had been an elegant array of native plants and minimalist stonework, now stood a garish collection of garden statuary. Concrete cherubs, a small fountain, and what appeared to be a life-sized deer crafted of metal. Thomas's mouth fell. Open. What the hell is that? I blinked, momentarily speechless. I believe your mother has redecorated my front garden. Our front garden, Thomas corrected automatically, then winced. Though at the moment, I'm happy to disown any connection. Whatever this is. As our driver pulled up to the main entrance, Phillips appeared at the top of the steps, his expression as impassive as ever despite the lawn carnage behind him. Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield, he greeted us as we emerged from the car. I trust you had a pleasant journey. Very pleasant, I replied, my eyes still fixed on the new garden additions. I see we've had some landscaping done in our absence. Phillips's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, madam. Eleanor felt the entrance lacked, in her words, personality and warmth. She had the items delivered 3 days ago. I informed her that any permanent changes to the property required your approval, but she insisted these were merely temporary guest contributions. Thomas made a strangled sound beside me. Guest contributions? She's been here less than 2 weeks. Indeed, sir. Phillips gestured to the staff who had appeared to collect our luggage. Perhaps you'd like to refresh yourselves before greeting your parents. They are currently taking tea in the South Garden. The South Garden? I repeated. That's part of the private family area. Yes, madam, Phillips replied, his tone conveying volumes while his expression remained neutral. Eleanor discovered it during what she termed an exploratory walk of the grounds. She was most impressed with the view and has taken to spending her afternoons there. Thomas and I exchanged glances. How exactly did she react when she realized whose house this is? He asked. For the first time, a hint of satisfaction crept into Phillips's expression. Perhaps it would be best if you viewed the security footage yourself. I've taken the liberty of compiling the relevant segments for your review. Inside, the house was blessedly unchanged, though I noted fresh flowers arranged in a style distinctly unlike my usual preference, more elaborate, with colors that clashed with the room's palette. Eleanor's touch, undoubtedly. She's been redecorating. Inside too? I asked as Phillips led us toward my study. Eleanor has made several suggestions, Phillips replied diplomatically. I've maintained the position that all changes must be approved by you first. However, she did replace some of the floral arrangements, claiming expertise from her time as the Lakeside Garden Club president. Thomas snorted. A position she campaigned for like it was the Senate, then used primarily to reject other members' garden designs. In my study, Phillips set up the security footage on the large monitor while we settled into the leather chairs. I'll bring refreshments while you review, he offered. Call if you need anything else. As soon as the door closed behind him, Thomas turned to me with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Ready to see my mother's grand entrance to her daughter-in-law's secret mansion? More than ready, I admitted, pressing play on the remote. The footage began with a date stamp from 2 days after our wedding. A moving truck appeared on the drive, followed by Eleanor and Richard's car. The camera angle switched to show Phillips, greeting them at the guest house, his posture perfectly correct as Eleanor gestured animatedly, clearly displeased with something. Audio would be helpful, Thomas muttered. As if in response, the system suddenly included sound, capturing Eleanor mid-sentence. Simply won't do, she was saying, her voice sharp with disapproval. This is hardly appropriate for long-term accommodation. I was expecting to stay in the main house with Thomas and Caroline. I'm afraid that won't be possible, madam, Phillips replied evenly. Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield have left explicit instructions that you and Mr. Whitfield Sr. are to be accommodated in the guest house during your stay. Eleanor's face flushed with indignation. Nonsense. There must be some misunderstanding. I'm Thomas's mother. Surely they didn't intend to relegate us to what amounts to servants' quarters. Richard winced visibly at his wife's words. Eleanor, please. This guest house is larger than our first home was. That's hardly the point, Richard, she snapped. The point is that family should stay together. I need to speak with whoever's in charge here. The property manager or caretaker. Phillips's expression remained impressively neutral. I am the house manager, madam, and I can assure you that I am following the owner's instructions precisely. Well, your employers should know better than to separate a mother from her son, Eleanor insisted, brushing past Phillips to peer through the guest house windows. This simply won't do. The main house must have at least 8 bedrooms from what I saw during the wedding. Surely they can spare one for us. The owners are very particular about their privacy, madam. Eleanor turned, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. Who exactly owns this place? I was under the impression it was a rental property for events. It is. A private residence, madam, Phillips replied. As for the ownership, I believe there has been some confusion. Clearly, Eleanor said dismissively. Well, never mind. I'll sort it out with Thomas when they return. In the meantime, we'll need access to the main house. I promise to help them set up their new home properly, and I can hardly do that from out here in the wilderness. The camera angle widened to show the wilderness, a beautifully landscaped path leading from the guest house to the main residence, bordered by flowering shrubs and mature trees. Limited access can be arranged for meals and social visits, Phillips allowed. However, I must insist that you respect the private areas of the home. Eleanor waved a hand dismissively. Yes, now about the movers. They'll need directions for our things. The footage cut to later that day, showing Eleanor entering the main house for the first time as a guest. Her expression as she took in the grand entrance hall was a study in conflicting emotions. Admiration warring with calculation, envy with determination. This is exactly the sort of home Thomas should have, she declared to Phillips, who walked 2 respectful paces behind her. Though the decor is a bit contemporary for my taste. Too minimalist. Family homes should feel warm, lived in. Owners are quite satisfied with the current design, Phillips replied. Eleanor ran a finger along a side table, as if checking for dust. The owners again. You're being very mysterious about them. Are they some sort of celebrities? Is that why all the secrecy? I am not at liberty to discuss the owner's personal details, madam. Eleanor's mouth tightened with annoyance. Well, I suppose it doesn't matter. Once Thomas and Caroline settle in after their honeymoon, we'll help them find a proper family. Home of their own. Something more suitable than that tiny apartment, but perhaps more traditional than this museum. The footage skipped ahead again, this time to what was clearly several days later. Eleanor was in the kitchen, instructing the chef about something while gesturing at an open cookbook. Traditional family recipes that Thomas grew up with, she was saying. I'm sure your haute cuisine is lovely, but sometimes a son wants his mother's cooking. The chef, Martine, maintained a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, Mrs. Whitfield. However, all meal planning must be approved by, yes, the owners. Eleanor interrupted. Well, I'm sure they won't mind if we adjust the menu slightly while we're here. After all, we're practically family. The scene shifted again, this time to the south garden. Eleanor was seated at the ornate iron table where I often took my morning coffee, a portfolio open before her. Richard sat opposite, looking uncomfortable. I've found 3 properties that would be perfect for Thomas and Caroline, Eleanor was saying, turning pages to show him. This one is just 2 streets from the country club. It would be perfect for starting a family, and there's a separate mother-in-law suite where we could stay during extended visits. Richard sighed audibly. Eleanor, don't you think we should wait until they return before making these plans? They might have their own ideas about where they want to live. Caroline might, Eleanor allowed with a sniff. But you know, Thomas has always valued my input on important decisions. Besides, that apartment of theirs is completely unsuitable, and this rental is clearly temporary. They'll need guidance. Thomas and I exchanged glances at this, both of us suppressing laughter at Eleanor's complete misunderstanding of the situation. The footage continued, showing Eleanor gradually making herself more at home, rearranging flowers, inspecting rooms, providing unsolicited advice to staff. Each time she attempted to access a restricted area, Phillips appeared as if by magic to redirect her with polite but firm insistence. Then came the moment we'd been waiting for. Day 7 of their stay, according to the timestamp. Eleanor was in the main library, examining the bookshelves with a critical eye, when she noticed a framed photograph partially hidden behind a decorative vase. The camera zoomed in as she picked it up, revealing an image of me accepting an award at a tech industry gala 2 years prior. Eleanor's brow furrowed in confusion. She set down the photo and began examining other frames throughout the room, finding more evidence of my connection to the house. Photos with industry leaders, framed magazine covers featuring Chentech, family pictures stretching back years. Phillips. Her voice rang out sharply. The house manager appeared in the doorway. Yes, madam? Eleanor held up one of the frames, a picture of me with my father at Chentech's opening of its new headquarters. What is the meaning of this? Why are there photographs? Of Caroline all over this house? Phillips maintained his impeccable composure. Those are personal items belonging to the owner, madam. The owner, Eleanor repeated slowly, the pieces visibly connecting in her mind. Her eyes widened. Are you saying that Caroline, my daughter-in-law, Caroline, owns this estate? Mrs. Whitfield is indeed the owner of this property, Phillips confirmed, his tone suggesting he was merely stating a known fact. I believed you were aware, given your family connection. Eleanor sank into the nearest chair, the photograph still clutched in her hand. That's impossible. She's just a startup employee. Thomas said she worked in tech, but he never mentioned. Mrs. Whitfield is the founder and CEO of Chentech Solutions, Phillips supplied helpfully. She purchased this estate 3 years ago. 3 years, Eleanor echoed faintly. But they were dating then. Thomas never said anything about her owning an estate, about her being wealthy. Perhaps that was a private matter between Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield, Phillips suggested. Eleanor's shock was rapidly transforming into something else, a calculation visible in her eyes as she processed this new information. And Thomas? Did he know? I couldn't say, madam, Phillips replied, though his slight hesitation suggested otherwise. He must have, Eleanor decided, standing abruptly. He must have known and kept it from us, from his own parents, after all we've done for him. The footage cut to later that same day. Eleanor was on her phone in the guest house living room, pacing as she spoke. Absolutely humiliated, Margaret. All this time, thinking we were helping them, when she's been secretly wealthy. An entire estate, Margaret, and apparently some sort of tech company executive. She paused, listening to the unseen Margaret's response. Of course I'm certain. There are photographs everywhere. And that insufferable house manager finally confirmed it. Caroline owns this entire property. The one we had the wedding at. Can you imagine the deception? Having us all there, letting us believe it was a rental venue? Another pause. Well, I certainly intend to have a conversation with Thomas when they return. And with Caroline? Though this does explain a few things. Her confidence, her dismissive attitude toward my advice. New money always lacks proper humility. Thomas snorted at this. Says the woman who wore white to our wedding. The final segment of footage showed Eleanor directing the delivery of the garden statuary we'd seen upon our arrival, her face set in determined lines as she instructed the workers on placement. The owners are particular about the landscaping, Phillips was attempting to explain. If my daughter-in-law has a problem with my little contribution, she can tell me herself when she returns, Eleanor replied tartly. Besides, this place needs a woman's touch. All this modern minimalism lacks character. As the footage ended, Thomas and I sat in silence for a moment, processing everything we'd seen. Well, he finally said, that was illuminating. Your mother works fast, I observed. 1 week to redecorate my garden, reorganize my kitchen, and plan our future housing. Our garden, Thomas corrected again, his lips twitching. And if it helps, even I'm appalled by those concrete cherubs. I laughed, some of the tension dissipating. What do you think she'll do when she sees us? Play the victim? Go on the offensive? With my mother, definitely offensive disguised as victimhood, Thomas predicted. She'll find a way to make your success a personal attack on her. A soft knock at the door heralded Phillips's return with a tray of iced tea and light refreshments. Your parents have been informed of your arrival, he reported. They're waiting in the south garden, as mentioned. Eleanor specifically requested you join them there as soon as possible. Of course she did, Thomas muttered. Thank you, Phillips, I said, accepting a glass of tea. How have they been as guests, really? Phillips considered his response carefully. Mr. Whitfield has been most pleasant. He's spent considerable time in the library and has taken several guided tours of the grounds with our head gardener. Eleanor has been enthusiastically involved in household matters. She has strong opinions about how a family home should be managed. I bet she does. Thomas sighed. Any disasters I should know about before we face her? Nothing irreparable, Phillips assured us. Though I would recommend reviewing the staff schedules. Eleanor took the liberty of adjusting them to accommodate her preference for later breakfasts and earlier dinners. I nearly choked on my tea. She changed my staff's schedules? Temporarily, Phillips clarified. I explained that permanent changes required your approval, but she felt that as the senior Mrs. Whitfield and a house guest, her comfort should be prioritized. Thomas put his head in his hands. I'm so sorry, Caroline. It's not your fault, I assured him, though I could feel my patience with Eleanor already wearing thin. Phillips, please restore the original schedules immediately, and have someone discreetly remove those garden statues while we're meeting with the Whitfields. I anticipated your wishes regarding the schedules, Phillips replied. As for the garden ornaments, I took the precaution of having detailed photographs taken for the record, should there be any. Discussion about their removal. Thomas looked up in admiration. Phillips, you're a treasure. Thank you, sir. Will there be anything else before you meet with your parents? I hesitated, then asked. Has Eleanor attempted to access any of the restricted areas, my office or the secure rooms? 3 attempts, Phillips confirmed. All redirected successfully. I have maintained the security protocols as instructed. Thank you, I said, relieved that at least my business information remained protected. That will be all for now. After Phillips left, Thomas and I took a moment to compose ourselves before heading to the South Garden. The footage had been enlightening, but I knew it was only a prelude to the confrontation awaiting us. How do you want to handle this? Thomas asked as we walked through the house. Firm boundaries from the start, or ease into it? I think we need to be clear immediately, I replied. Your mother has already overstepped significantly. If we don't establish limits now, she'll continue pushing. Thomas nodded, his expression resolute. Agreed, and I'll take the lead. She's my mother, and it's time I stopped letting her steamroll over everything. Pride swelled in my chest at his words. Throughout our relationship, Thomas had struggled to stand firmly against Eleanor's manipulations. His determination now to protect our boundaries marked a significant shift, one I found immensely attractive. Have I mentioned how sexy assertive Thomas is? I murmured, squeezing his hand. He grinned, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Save that thought for later, when we're not about to face the Inquisition. We reached the French doors leading to the South Garden, pausing for a moment to observe the scene before announcing our presence. Eleanor and Richard sat at the iron table, she with a notepad before her, he with a resigned expression. Even from a distance, I could see Eleanor had rearranged my garden furniture into what she presumably considered a more welcoming configuration. Ready? Thomas asked quietly. I nodded, squaring my shoulders. Ready? He pushed open the doors and we stepped out into the afternoon sunshine to face the mother-in-law who had worn white to our wedding, announced her intention to move in with us, and spent the past 2 weeks redecorating my home without permission. Eleanor's head snapped up at our approach, her expression cycling rapidly from surprise to calculation to a practiced warmth that didn't reach her eyes. Thomas, Caroline, you're finally home, she exclaimed, rising to greet us. We have so much to discuss. I had no doubt about that. The question was whether Eleanor was prepared for the discussion we were about to have, one that would permanently establish the new balance of power in our family dynamic. Based on the garden cherubs and rearranged staff schedules, I rather thought she wasn't. Richard stood more slowly, genuine warmth in his smile as he embraced his son. Welcome back. You both look wonderful. Bali clearly agreed with you. It was perfect, Thomas replied, keeping one arm firmly around my waist as Eleanor approached for her turn at greetings. She air-kissed my cheek, then Thomas's, before stepping back to give us an appraising look. "You're both so tan. Caroline, you'll want to be careful about sun damage at your age, but never mind that now. We have important matters to discuss." "Yes, we do," I agreed pleasantly. "Starting with those interesting new additions to my front garden." Eleanor's smile didn't falter, though her eyes narrowed slightly at my direct approach. "Ah, you noticed my little contribution. I thought the entrance needed some personality. This place is beautiful, of course, but it lacks that lived-in family feeling." "It's lacked that, because until 2 weeks ago, I lived here alone," I pointed out. "Now that Thomas and I are building our life here together, we'll decide how to make it feel like our family home." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line before she recovered her composure. "Of course, dear. I was merely trying to help. After all, with my experience in home decor and garden design, I thought you might appreciate some guidance." "What Caroline means," Thomas interjected firmly, "is that we appreciate the thought. But any changes to our home need to be discussed with us first." "Your home," Eleanor repeated, emphasizing the word subtly. "Yes, well, that's actually something we should discuss, isn't it? Imagine my surprise to discover that my new daughter-in-law has been keeping such significant secrets. And there it was, the pivot from territorial decoration to moral indignation over my privacy. Exactly as Thomas had predicted. "There was no secret," Thomas stated before I could respond. "Caroline's financial situation is her private business, which she chose to share with me when she was ready. It wasn't relevant to anyone else." "Not relevant?" Eleanor's voice rose slightly. "Thomas, she owns the venue where you got married. She's apparently some sort of wealthy businesswoman, and you didn't think that was worth mentioning to your own parents." "Actually," I interjected calmly, "I'm the founder and CEO of Chentech Solutions. We specialize in cybersecurity for financial institutions. And no, my ownership of this property wasn't relevant to our wedding celebration. We chose it because it's beautiful and meaningful to us." "You deliberately misled us," Eleanor accused, abandoning all pretense of warmth. "Had us believing you were just another startup employee when all along you were." "Successful?" I supplied when she trailed off. "Independent? Financially secure?" "Don't twist my words," she snapped. "You know perfectly well what I mean. You presented yourself as someone who needed our family's help and guidance, when the reality was quite different." Thomas laughed incredulously. "Mom, when has Caroline ever asked for your help or guidance? If anything, you've insisted on providing unsolicited advice since the day you met her." Eleanor turned to Richard, clearly expecting support. "Can you believe this? After everything we've done for them?" Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Eleanor, perhaps we should give the newlyweds some space to settle in before having this conversation. They've just returned from their honeymoon." "Thank you, Dad," Thomas said gratefully. Eleanor, however, was not to be deterred. "Space? They've had 2 weeks of space while we've been living in that guest house, thinking we were helping our son and his wife establish themselves. Only to discover it was all a charade." "There was no charade," I countered evenly. "There was privacy, which is my right, just as it's now my right, as the owner of this property, to request that any changes to my home be approved by me first." Eleanor's face flushed with anger. "So that's how it's going to be? You'll use your money and position to control everything? To dictate terms to family?" "No," I replied, my patience waning. "That's how you operate, Eleanor. I simply expect basic courtesy and respect for boundaries, something you've struggled with since the day we met." The tension in the garden was palpable as Eleanor and I locked eyes, each measuring the other's resolve. This was the moment of truth. Would she back down and accept the new reality, or escalate further? The answer, it seemed, would define our relationship for years to come. The garden fell silent as my words hung in the air between us. Eleanor's face had gone from flushed to pale, her carefully maintained composure slipping for the first time since I'd known her. "I have always treated you with nothing but kindness," she finally said, her voice trembling with what might have been anger or genuine hurt. It was hard to tell with Eleanor. "I welcomed you into our family, shared our traditions, offered guidance when you clearly needed it. And this is how you repay that generosity? By hiding your true circumstances and then attacking me for trying to help?" Thomas stepped forward before I could respond. "Mom, that's enough. No one is attacking you. But you need to understand that. This is our home now, mine and Caroline's. We make the decisions about how it looks, how it's run, and who stays here." Eleanor's gaze shifted to her son, wounded betrayal replacing indignation. "I see. So now that you've married into money, you no longer need your parents? All those years of sacrifice, your education, your first car, the down payment on your apartment, those count for nothing?" I had to admire her tactical pivot. When confronted with her boundary violations, Eleanor had seamlessly redirected to emotional manipulation, positioning herself as the victim of our ingratitude rather than the aggressor who had redecorated my home without permission. "No one is saying we don't need or want you in our lives," I interjected calmly. "We're simply establishing healthy boundaries," which, frankly, should have been in place long before now. Richard, who had been watching this exchange with growing discomfort, finally spoke up. "Eleanor, perhaps we should consider finding our own place sooner rather than later. Thomas and Caroline are newlyweds. They deserve space to build their life together." Eleanor rounded on him with surprising ferocity. "Don't you start, Richard. This isn't about giving them space. This is about respect, about family loyalty, about control," Thomas finished quietly. His mother froze, staring at him as if he'd struck her. "What did you just say to me?" "This is about control," Thomas repeated, more firmly this time. "It always has been. The white dress at our wedding wasn't an accident or a last-minute substitution. It was a statement. Moving in with us wasn't about needing a place to stay temporarily. It was about inserting yourself into our marriage from the beginning. Redecorating Caroline's home while we were away wasn't about adding warmth. It was about marking your territory." I watched my husband in silent admiration. This was a side of Thomas I'd glimpsed only rarely, the man who could see through his mother's manipulations and call them out directly, without flinching from the inevitable emotional fallout. "How dare you?" Eleanor whispered, though there was a flicker of something like fear in her eyes. "After everything I've done for you." "I'm grateful for everything you and Dad have done for me," Thomas assured her, his tone softening slightly. "But I'm a married man now, building a life with Caroline. That means our relationship has to change. You can't treat our home like an extension of yours, or Caroline like a temporary obstacle to your relationship with me." Eleanor sank back into her chair, pressing a hand to her chest in a gesture that seemed only partly theatrical. "I think I need a moment. This is all very overwhelming." Richard immediately moved to her side, paternal concern written across his face. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation later, when everyone's had time to process." "An excellent suggestion," I agreed, relieved at the prospect of a reprieve. 2 weeks of honeymoon bliss followed by this intense confrontation had left me emotionally drained. "Why don't we all take some time to settle in? Thomas and I need to unpack, and I'm sure you both could use some space as well." Eleanor's head snapped up, sudden clarity in her eyes. "You want us to leave?" "Not immediately," Thomas clarified. "But yes, sooner rather than later. The guest house was always meant to be a temporary arrangement while you found a new place." "I see." Eleanor's voice had gone cold. "And naturally, now that I understand my daughter-in-law's financial situation, you assume I'll be eager to benefit from it. To take advantage." "That's not," Thomas began. "Richard, We'll need to accelerate our house hunting, Eleanor continued, as if Thomas hadn't spoken. Perhaps that property on Maple Street that we dismissed as too small. We wouldn't want to impose on Caroline's generosity any longer than necessary. The swift shift to wounded dignity was masterful, I had to admit, especially since she had been planning to impose indefinitely just 2 weeks ago. You're welcome to stay in the guest house while you look, I offered, determined to remain gracious, despite her theatrics. We're happy to have you close by. We just need to establish some ground rules about the main house. Ground rules, Eleanor repeated, as if I'd suggested something outlandish. For visiting my own son in his home. In our home, Thomas corrected gently. And yes, Mom, ground rules. Like calling before you come over. Respecting private areas, not rearranging furniture or staff schedules. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. I was only trying to help. I understand, I said, though we all knew that wasn't entirely true. And we appreciate the thought. But going forward, Thomas and I will make the decisions about our home. A tense silence fell over the garden. Richard looked relieved at the temporary truce, while Eleanor's expression suggested she was already formulating her next approach. Thomas maintained his position at my side, his hand warm and supportive at the small of my back. Well, Eleanor finally said, rising to her feet with careful dignity, this has been an enlightening conversation. If you'll excuse me, I think I'll retire to the guest house to rest. It's been quite a shock, discovering how thoroughly my son and his wife have kept me in the dark. Mom? Thomas started. No, she waved him off. I understand completely. New money often comes with new priorities. Family traditions, parental guidance, these things naturally become less important when there's wealth to consider. I bit back the sharp retort that sprang to my lips. Eleanor was baiting me, trying to provoke a reaction that would validate her narrative of me as the cold, calculating daughter-in-law who had corrupted her son with money and secrecy. We'll talk more later, Thomas said firmly, when everyone's had time to process. Eleanor nodded stiffly, then turned to leave. Richard hesitated, clearly torn between following his wife and saying something more to us. I'm sorry about all this, he finally murmured. She's struggling with the changes, with letting go. It's not an excuse, just... He trailed off helplessly. We know, Dad, Thomas assured him. Just try to help her understand that this isn't about shutting her out. It's about establishing our own household, our own way. Richard nodded, squeezed his son's shoulder once, and hurried after his wife. As they disappeared into the house, I sagged against Thomas, suddenly exhausted. Well, that went about as well as could be expected, he laughed mirthlessly. Which is to say terribly, but not catastrophically. Your mother has a remarkable talent for turning any confrontation about her behavior into an indictment of everyone else's character. Years of practice, Thomas sighed, guiding me to sit in one of the garden chairs. And I enabled it for too long. I'm sorry, Caroline. I should have stood up to her years ago. You're standing up to her now, I pointed out, squeezing his hand. That's what matters. Still, I hate that you had to deal with this right after our honeymoon. That garden statuary is a crime against good taste, by the way. I can't believe she thought those cherubs would improve anything. I laughed, some of the tension releasing. Phillips is having them removed as we speak, though I'm tempted to save one as a reminder of what happens when boundaries aren't clear. From the start, Thomas grinned. Maybe we could hide it in the guest house somewhere. Give her a taste of her own redecorating medicine. Tempting, but I think we need to take the high road here. Show her what actual maturity looks like. He nodded, growing serious again. She'll regroup, you know. This was just the opening skirmish. Eleanor Whitfield doesn't surrender territory easily, even when it was never hers to begin with. I'm counting on it, I admitted. But so long as we present a united front, she'll eventually have to accept the new reality. United we stand, Thomas agreed, leaning down to kiss me softly. Though I wouldn't mind lying down for a while. Jet lag is hitting me hard. Bed sounds perfect, I agreed, rising to my feet. The Eleanor situation will still be there after we've rested. As we made our way back through the house, I noticed small changes everywhere. Cushions rearranged, photographs subtly repositioned, flowers in vases that belonged elsewhere. Eleanor had been busy during our absence, marking the space as hers in 100 tiny ways. We'll need to do a full sweep, I murmured to Thomas. She's been nesting. I'm almost afraid to see what she did to the kitchen, he replied. You know, how she feels about your appliance choices. I groaned, remembering Eleanor's pointed comments about my preference for sleek, modern kitchen equipment over the proper tools she deemed essential. If she's replaced my espresso machine with a percolator, there will be consequences? Phillips materialized as we reached the main staircase, his timing impeccable as always. Shall I have the master suite prepared for your rest, or would you prefer refreshments first? The suite, please, Thomas answered. And Phillips? Thank you for managing everything while we were away. I know my mother can be challenging. A ghost of a smile touched the house manager's lips. Managing challenging situations is part of my job description, sir. Though I will admit, Eleanor has tested the limits of professional courtesy at times. I want a full report tomorrow, I told him. Everything she's moved, changed, or attempted to access. We'll need to restore the house to its proper order. Already in progress, madam, Phillips assured me. The garden ornaments are being placed in storage as we speak. The staff schedules have been restored, and I've taken the liberty of documenting all interior adjustments for your review. Thomas shook his head in amazement. Phillips, you're worth your weight in gold. Thank you, sir. I strive for thoroughness. He hesitated, then added, There is one matter that may require your immediate attention, however. Eleanor has invited guests for dinner tomorrow evening. She informed the kitchen staff this morning. I stopped short on the stairs. She's invited guests to my house without asking? Yes, madam. The Carmichaels and the Prestons. She mentioned something about introducing you to the right sort of people now that you're establishing yourselves in society. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, as if praying for patience. Of course she did. The Carmichaels are her bridge partners. Old money, old views, extraordinarily boring conversationalists. And the Prestons are basically Eleanor's fan club. Meredith Preston hasn't had an original thought since 1992. I take, It will be canceling? Phillips inquired, his tone neutral, though I detected a hint of hopeful anticipation. I considered our options. Canceling would create another confrontation, potentially giving Eleanor more ammunition for her disrespectful daughter-in-law narrative. Allowing the dinner would set a dangerous precedent, suggesting she had the authority to entertain in our home without permission. No, I decided after a moment. The dinner will proceed, but with some adjustments. Thomas looked at me in surprise. You want to have dinner with the Bridge Club Brigade? What I want is to establish exactly who owns this house and makes the decisions here, I explained. If we cancel, Eleanor plays the victim. If we go along with her plans exactly as she's arranged them, we validate her authority. But if we allow the dinner with our own modifications, we demonstrate who's really in charge, Thomas finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. Brilliant. Phillips, please inform the kitchen that we'll be taking over the menu planning for tomorrow's dinner, and move the location from the formal dining room to the garden pavilion. I believe Eleanor mentioned during the wedding that she found it unnecessarily ostentatious. She did indeed, madam, Phillips confirmed, a glint of appreciation in his eyes. Several times. Perfect. And add 4 more guests to the list, my father and Lynette, plus my sister Vivian and her husband. I believe Eleanor will appreciate the opportunity to expand her social circle. Thomas was grinning now. You're evil in the most magnificent way. Not evil, I corrected. Strategic. Eleanor wants to use our home to enhance her social standing. I'm simply ensuring she understands whose home it actually is. Will there be anything else? Phillips asked, clearly on board with the plan. Yes. Please inform Eleanor of the changes once they're already in motion. Present them as enhancements to her lovely idea, not alterations. With pleasure, madam, Phillips replied, the faintest suggestion of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I shall inform her that you were simply too excited about her initiative to wait for consultation on the details. As he departed to set our countermeasures in motion, Thomas pulled me close on the staircase. Have I mentioned lately how incredibly attractive it is when you outmaneuver my mother? You could stand to mention it more often, I teased, leaning into his embrace. Now, about that nap. We made it to the master suite without further interruptions, though I half expected to find Eleanor had redecorated our bedroom in our absence. Thankfully, the secure wing had remained off-limits to her, protected by the biometric locks I'd installed long before the wedding. As Thomas fell into a jet-lagged sleep beside me, I found myself wide awake, mentally preparing for the dinner party tomorrow. It would be the first real test of our marriage in the face of Eleanor's manipulations, a public setting where she would undoubtedly try to reassert her authority while maintaining her facade of wounded dignity. I would need to be one step ahead, not just for my own satisfaction, but for Thomas's sake as well. The shift in our power dynamic, from me concealing my wealth to openly acknowledging I was the primary breadwinner and property owner, was significant. Some men would struggle with it, their egos unable to accommodate a wife whose success outshone their own. Thomas wasn't like that, I reminded myself. He had been surprised and hurt by my secrecy, but not threatened by my success. If anything, he seemed relieved that we could finally live authentically, without the pretense I had maintained throughout our relationship. No, the real threat to our marriage wasn't Thomas's ego. It was Eleanor's influence, her lifelong hold on her son, her expectations about his role in the family, her assumptions about how a marriage should function. Those were the bonds we needed to gently but firmly break if we were to build a healthy life together. Starting with tomorrow's dinner party. I must have eventually drifted off because I woke to Thomas gently shaking my shoulder. The warm glow of sunset filled our bedroom, suggesting we'd slept for several hours. Caroline, he murmured, you might want to see this. I blinked awake, taking in his amused expression. What is it? Phillips sent a message. Apparently my mother has been busy since our conversation in the garden. Fully alert now, I sat up. What's she done? Called a real estate agent. She and my father toured 3 properties this afternoon. He handed me his phone, showing photos Phillips had somehow obtained of Eleanor and Richard being escorted through a Tudor-style home not far from our estate. That was unexpectedly efficient, I observed. Oh, it gets better. The house they're most interested in, he swiped to another photo, is directly across from the Carmichaels. Apparently being near the right sort of people is a priority. I laughed despite myself. So she's accelerating her plans to pretend it was her idea all along to find their own place quickly? Classic Eleanor move, Thomas confirmed. Never admit defeat. Just change the narrative to make it seem like everything is proceeding according to your master plan. Well, that's actually good news, isn't it? If they find their own place soon, we can avoid weeks of territorial disputes. Thomas's expression suggested he wasn't convinced. Maybe. Or maybe this is just the setup for her next play. The house they're looking at needs substantial renovation. Want to bet she'll suggest staying in our guest house just until the work is complete? I groaned, recognizing the plausibility of his prediction. Which could take months, conveniently, stretching through the holidays and giving her ample reason to be involved in every aspect of our first Christmas together. Exactly. Thomas sat beside me on the bed. So, what's our counter-strategy? I considered the situation. Eleanor was adapting quickly to the new reality, already formulating plans to maintain her influence despite the setback of discovering my true financial situation. She wouldn't relinquish control easily, but perhaps we could channel her energies in a direction that benefited everyone. What if we offered to help expedite the renovations on whatever house they choose? I suggested. Financial assistance with the understanding that it creates a clear timeline for their move. Thomas looked thoughtful. That could work. My father would definitely appreciate it. He hates living in unsettled circumstances. But my mother might see it as an attempt to buy them off. Then we frame it as a homecoming gift, a celebration of their new beginning, not a bribe to hasten their departure. Clever, he acknowledged. Though knowing my mother, she'll find some way to turn even generosity into an opportunity for control. No doubt, I agreed. But at least it puts us in the position of being gracious, rather than defensive. A knock at the bedroom door interrupted our plotting. Phillips's voice came through clearly. Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield, I apologize for the disturbance. Eleanor is requesting your presence in the main library. She says it's a matter of some urgency. Thomas and I exchanged wary glances. Did she say what kind of urgency? I called back. She mentioned something about needing to discuss tomorrow's dinner arrangements immediately, as there have been some unacceptable changes made without her consultation. That didn't take long, Thomas muttered. Please inform Eleanor that we'll join her shortly, I responded to Phillips. We need a few minutes to refresh ourselves after our nap. Very good, madam. As the sound of Phillips's footsteps receded, I turned to Thomas. Ready for round 2? He sighed, running a hand through his sleep-tousled hair. As ready as I'll ever be, though I'm tempted to just tell her the dinner is canceled entirely and put an end to this power play. We could, I acknowledged, but I think there's value in seeing this through. It establishes the tone for all future interactions. If we give in now, she'll keep pushing. If we assert ourselves firmly, but fairly, she'll still keep pushing, but with the knowledge that we'll push back, Thomas finished wryly. You're right. Let's face the music. We took our time getting ready, a small act of resistance against Eleanor's demand for immediate attention. I changed into a simple but elegant shift dress, while Thomas opted for casual trousers and a button-down shirt, comfortable but put together, sending the message that we were at ease in our own home. As we made our way to the library, I could feel Thomas tensing beside me. Remember, I murmured, united front, no matter what she says or how she tries to divide us. United, he agreed, squeezing my hand, always. We found Eleanor pacing the library, a tablet clutched in her hands. Richard sat in one of the leather armchairs, looking resigned to his role as witness to another confrontation. Phillips stood discreetly near the door, his expression neutral, but his presence a reassuring reminder that this was, ultimately, my house and my rules. Finally, Eleanor exclaimed as we entered. I've been waiting for nearly 30 minutes. I understand you need your rest after traveling, but this is a matter of some urgency. What seems to be the problem, Mom? Thomas asked evenly. She thrust the tablet toward us, displaying what appeared to be a revised dinner menu. This is unacceptable. I specifically planned a traditional 3-course meal with the beef Wellington that Thomas loves. Now I'm being told we're serving some sort of modern fusion menu instead. And in the garden pavilion rather than the proper dining room? Yes, I confirmed calmly. I thought the pavilion would be lovely this time of year. And Chef Martine has prepared a special menu showcasing local ingredients with Asian influences. A nod to my cultural heritage. Eleanor's nostrils flared slightly. The Carmichaels are very traditional people. They expect certain standards when invited to dinner. The Carmichaels are welcome to dine elsewhere if our hospitality doesn't meet their standards, Thomas replied, his tone pleasant but firm. And what about these additional guests? Eleanor demanded, swiping to another screen. I specifically curated this gathering to introduce you to the right social circle. Adding your family disrupts the entire dynamic I was trying to create. I raised an eyebrow. The right social circle? Eleanor, this is our home. We decide who to invite to. Our table. I was only trying to help you establish yourselves properly, she insisted. Now that I understand your position, it's even more important that you're introduced to the right people. New money needs proper connections to be accepted in certain circles. Thomas stiffened beside me. Mom, you need to stop. Caroline doesn't need your help being accepted anywhere. She's a respected business leader who moves in circles you've never even approached. Eleanor looked as though she'd been slapped. I'm only thinking of your future, Thomas. Your father and I have spent decades building relationships with these people. They can open doors for you both. The doors are already open, I told her gently, deciding to take a different approach. But we appreciate your desire to introduce us to your friends. That's why we're keeping the dinner. We've simply made some adjustments to make it more reflective of who we are as a couple. She seemed momentarily thrown by my conciliatory tone. Well, I suppose some adjustments are to be expected, but moving it from the dining room is practical given the expanded guest list, I finished for her. The pavilion comfortably seats 12. The dining room would feel cramped with that many people. I see. Eleanor's grip on the tablet relaxed, slightly. And you insist on including your family? Yes, Thomas confirmed. Caroline's father is an important part of our lives, and we want him to know your friends as well. Building bridges between our families is important to us. This appeal to family unity seemed to resonate with Eleanor, or at least made it difficult for her to object without seeming petty. I suppose that makes sense, she conceded reluctantly. Though I should warn you that the Carmichaels can be rather traditional in their views. They may not be accustomed to more diverse social gatherings. The thinly veiled reference to my Chinese heritage was typical Eleanor, just subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability while delivering her barb. Then tomorrow will be an educational experience for them, I replied pleasantly. Exposure to different perspectives is so valuable, don't you think? Before Eleanor could respond, Richard stood up from his chair. The changes sound lovely, Caroline. A garden dinner with an expanded guest list will be much more relaxed and enjoyable for everyone. His unexpected support seemed to deflate Eleanor's remaining arguments. Well, I suppose we'll make it work, she said stiffly, though I do wish you had consulted me before making these changes. After all, these are my friends. Next time, we'll be sure to discuss any dinner plans in advance, Thomas promised. Of course, that assumes you'll discuss with us before extending invitations in our home. Eleanor's lips pursed, but she nodded curtly. Naturally. Now, if you'll... Excuse me, I should call Beatrice Carmichael to prepare her for the adjusted arrangements. As she swept from the room, Richard lingered behind. I apologize for all this, he said quietly once she was out of earshot. Eleanor is struggling with the changes in your relationship, with Thomas setting boundaries. We understand, I assured him. This transition isn't easy for anyone, but necessary for our marriage to thrive. Richard nodded, his expression softening. She'll adjust, given time. Eleanor has always needed to feel essential to Thomas's life. Finding her new role will take patience from all of us. After he left to join his wife, Thomas slumped into one of the library chairs. Round 2 goes to us, I think, though at a cost. What cost? I asked, perching on the arm of his chair. Energy, emotional bandwidth, the simple joy of being newlyweds, without family drama. He looked up at me with a wry smile. I'm sorry our homecoming has been dominated by managing my mother. Hey, I knew what I was signing up for when I married you, I teased, running my fingers through his hair. The Thomas Whitfield package deal includes Eleanor. I accepted those terms. Still, our first day back shouldn't be all about her, he protested. We should be celebrating our return, enjoying our home together. And we will, I promised. Starting now. Phillips, I called. The house manager appeared in the doorway as if he'd been waiting for his cue. Yes, madam? Please inform the kitchen that Mr. Whitfield and I will be dining privately in the East Terrace tonight. Nothing formal, just wine, charcuterie, perhaps some light dessert. And we are not to be disturbed except in case of emergency. Very good, madam. I'll arrange it immediately. Phillips hesitated, then added, And shall I inform Eleanor that you will be unavailable for the remainder of the evening? Thomas grinned at the subtle acknowledgement that his mother would undoubtedly find another urgent matter requiring our attention. Yes, I confirmed, politely but firmly. As Phillips departed to execute our evening plans, Thomas pulled me into his lap. Have I mentioned lately that I love how you handle everything? My mother, this house, our life together? You could stand to mention it more often, I murmured, leaning in to kiss him. Now, shall we reclaim our honeymoon mood before tomorrow's dinner party from hell? Lead the way, Mrs. Whitfield, he replied, eyes dark with promise. After all, it is your house. Our house, I corrected him, and don't you forget it. As we made our way to the East Terrace, I couldn't help but feel a surge of optimism. Yes, Eleanor would continue testing boundaries. Yes, tomorrow's dinner would undoubtedly bring new challenges. But Thomas and I were united, stronger together than either of us alone. Eleanor had worn white to my wedding and invited herself to move into my house without realizing I owned it. But in doing so, she had inadvertently accelerated the reckoning that would redefine our family dynamic for years to come. Tomorrow's dinner party would be just the beginning. The evening of the dinner party arrived with impeccable weather, as if the universe itself had decided to support our cause. The garden pavilion glowed with soft lighting, each table setting a masterpiece of understated elegance. I had requested a subtle blending of Eastern and Western elements, blue and white porcelain alongside crystal stemware, cherry blossoms arranged with garden roses. It's perfect, Thomas murmured as we inspected the final arrangements. Completely different from what my mother had planned, yet impossible to criticize, I added with a smile. That's the key. Eleanor emerged from the house precisely 30 minutes before the guests were due to arrive, dressed in a navy blue ensemble that practically screamed proper hostess. Her steps faltered briefly when she saw the transformed pavilion. I see. You've made further changes, she observed, running a finger along one of the place cards. These aren't the seating arrangements I provided. We thought this arrangement would create more balanced conversation, I explained smoothly. You'll still be seated with the Carmichaels, of course. Before she could object further, the first guests arrived. My father and Lynette, impeccably dressed and bearing an expensive bottle of wine. Eleanor's expression tightened as she watched Thomas embrace them warmly. David? She greeted my father with cold politeness. How unexpected to see you here. Not at all, my father replied cheerfully. When my daughter hosts her first dinner party in her home, I wouldn't miss it for the world. The emphasis on her home was subtle but unmistakable. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. The Carmichaels arrived next, Beatrice and Howard, both looking slightly bewildered by the garden setting and expanded guest list. Eleanor rushed to greet them, murmuring explanations that I couldn't quite hear but could easily imagine. The Prestons followed shortly after, then Vivian and her husband, completing our party of 12. As we took our seats, I noted with satisfaction that Eleanor had been neatly hemmed in between Howard Carmichael and Richard, with no direct line to influence the broader conversation. Thomas sat at one end of the table, I at the other, with our respective allies distributed strategically throughout. What a lovely setting, Beatrice Carmichael commented as the first course was served. Though I must admit, I was expecting the formal dining room Eleanor described. The pavilion is much more suitable for a summer evening, my father interjected, before Eleanor could respond. Caroline has always had an excellent eye for creating the perfect atmosphere. Indeed, Eleanor said tightly, though the original plan was somewhat different. Plans evolve, I replied with a warm smile, especially when there's an opportunity to blend traditions and create something unique. The conversation shifted as the fusion menu unfolded, each dish prompting discussion of ingredients, cultural influences, and culinary techniques. Even the Carmichaels, initially reserved, began asking interested questions about the Asian elements incorporated into each course. I must say, Howard commented after tasting the miso-glazed sea base, this is absolutely exquisite. So different from our usual fare. Eleanor's attempts to steer the conversation toward more traditional topics, the country club renovations, mutual acquaintances, proper table settings, were repeatedly thwarted as guests found themselves genuinely engaged by the culinary and cultural exchange unfolding. By dessert, a delicate green tea panna cotta with local berries, even she had fallen silent, watching with barely concealed dismay as her carefully orchestrated social event transformed into something entirely different than she had envisioned. Caroline, Beatrice said as we enjoyed after-dinner drinks, Eleanor mentioned you work in technology. I'd love to hear more about your company. Eleanor interjected quickly. It's just a small startup. Nothing that would interest... Actually, my father cut in with poorly disguised glee. Chentech Solutions is a leader in financial cybersecurity, with over 300 employees and clients including 6 of the country's largest banking institutions. The table fell silent as all eyes turned to me. Is that true? Howard asked, clearly impressed. We've been looking for better security solutions for our investment firm. Perhaps we should talk. As I handed him my business card, I caught Eleanor's expression shifting from frustration to calculation. She recognized defeat in this battle, but was already recalibrating for the next skirmish. The evening concluded with effusive compliments from all guests. Even the Carmichaels, whom Eleanor had positioned as traditionalists, seemed genuinely delighted by the experience. We must do this again, Beatrice insisted, clasping my hands warmly. And you must tell me where you found those magnificent blue and white porcelain pieces. Family heirlooms, I explained, passed down through generations. On my father's side, Eleanor watched this exchange with narrowed eyes, another piece of her narrative about my background crumbling before her. As the last guests departed, she approached us in the entrance hall. Well, she said with forced brightness, that was certainly different than I expected, though I suppose it all worked out in the end. It was perfect, Thomas replied, his arm around my waist. Thank you for the initial idea, Mom. We couldn't have planned a better first dinner party in our home. Eleanor's smile tightened at the emphasis on our home, but she rallied admirably. Yes, well, speaking of homes, Richard and I have news. She gestured to her husband, who stepped forward. We've made an offer on the Tudor house, Richard announced. It was accepted this afternoon. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased at this unexpected development. Congratulations. We thought you'd be happy, Eleanor replied with an edge to her voice. Though the renovations will take some time, we'll need to stay in the guest house for at least a few weeks while the essential work is completed. Ah, there. It was exactly as Thomas had predicted. Actually, Thomas said before I could respond, we have a wedding gift for you both. He nodded to Phillips, who appeared with an envelope. What's this? Richard asked, accepting the envelope with a puzzled expression. Open it, Thomas encouraged. Inside was a contract with one of the area's premier renovation companies, along with a letter establishing a substantial budget for expedited work. We've arranged for the renovations to be completed within 3 weeks, I explained as Eleanor and Richard stared at the documents in shock. The contractors can start tomorrow. Richard seemed genuinely moved. This is incredibly generous. Eleanor's reaction was more complex. Surprise, calculation, and finally, a reluctant recognition. Very thoughtful, she managed, though 3 weeks seems ambitious. They'll work quickly, I assured her. And of course, you're welcome in the guest house until everything is ready, with a clear timeline for moving to your new home. The unspoken message hung in the air between us. Your stay has an expiration date. Eleanor studied my face for a long moment, then Thomas's. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her that this particular battle was lost. Well, she finally said, summoning a gracious smile. It seems you've thought of everything. We try, Thomas replied, matching her tone. Later that night, as Thomas and I prepared for bed, he laughed suddenly. Did you see my mother's face when Howard Carmichael asked for your business card? I thought she might spontaneously combust. She's adapting quickly, though, I observed, already recalibrating her approach. Always. But we've established the new normal now. She knows where the boundaries are, even if she'll keep testing them. I slipped into bed beside him, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. 3 weeks until they move to their own place. Maybe then we can finally enjoy being newlyweds without family drama. I wouldn't count on it entirely, Thomas warned, pulling me close. Eleanor will still be Eleanor, but at least she'll be Eleanor from a respectable distance, in her own house, with your renovations that she'll simultaneously criticize and brag about to her friends. And she'll never again make the mistake of underestimating me, I added, or wear white to any future family functions. To boundaries, Thomas murmured, kissing me softly. To boundaries, I agreed. And to unexpected wedding gifts, like discovering your spouse has a backbone of steel when it comes to protecting your marriage. As we drifted toward sleep, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From a mother-in-law wearing white to my wedding and announcing her moving plans, to the establishment of clear boundaries and a new family dynamic. Eleanor would always be Eleanor, testing limits and seeking control. But Thomas and I had proven we could stand united. The road ahead would have its challenges, but I fell asleep content in the knowledge that we'd face them together, in our house on our terms, with our boundaries firmly in place. Even the most determined mother-in-law in a white wedding dress couldn't change that. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.